training. This idea is central to my work because I've witnessed its absence just as often as I've experienced its power. Through my career as an architect and an urban strategist, I've worked with governments, investors, universities, civic organizations, and communities across multiple continents. I've seen extraordinary technical expertise fail because relationships were weak. I've also seen modest resources produce extraordinary outcomes because trust already existed. Too often we assume that development begins with money. In reality, it actually begins with relationships. Money follows confidence. Investment follows trust. Innovation follows collaboration. Now, this does not mean that relationships substitute for sound economics, capable institutions, or rigorous governance. Trust without competence can't deliver. Goodwill without accountability eventually dissolves. Relational capital becomes valuable precisely because it enables other forms of capital to work together. Financial capital, human capital, natural capital, intellectual capital, and cultural capital. It's the connective tissue, not a replacement for the body. Now, this matters now because Africa stands at a profound inflection point. The continent's population is growing rapidly, its cities are expanding, and its young people will shape an increasing share of the world's talent, creativity, and demand. If the governments responsible for preparing this future are doing so with a shrinking fiscal room, rising debt costs, and a development finance system in transition. We need to hold two truths at once. Africa possesses extraordinary possibility, and it faces extraordinary pressure. Its combined markets, natural resources, cultural influence, and human creativity make it central to the world's future. But possibility is not destiny. Democracy does not become a dividend by declaration. Urbanization does not automatically become prosperity. Technology does not become transformation simply because it arrives. America, too, stands at an inflection point. We're entering a much more multipolar world at the very moment when powerful nations are retreating from global commitments and turning inward. Nativism, suspicion of the other, and the belief that another people's progress must come at one's own expense are all expressions of the same scarcity of relationship I've described today. The alternative is not naive optimism. It's the deliberate construction of trust across difference, the capacity to organize opportunity within adversity, to see potential allies where others see only strangers, and to understand that shared prosperity enlarges what becomes possible for everyone. Africa, people of African descent, and their allies have an essential role to play in building that alternative. They carry cultural, emotional, economic, and ethical connections across places that history has separated. They also remind us that disruption has always been essential to innovation. It challenges accepted norms, stretches the imagination, asks a simple but transformative question, what if? And that difference is made by institutions such as these. The capacity to convert population growth into learning, learning into enterprise, enterprise into employment, and employment into dignity. Every year, between 10 and 12 million young Africans enter the labor market, while only 3 million formal jobs are created. Behind those figures are millions of individual ambitions, a graduate seeking a first opportunity, an entrepreneur looking for a market, a family hoping that education will deliver a different future. If we discuss the demographic dividend without creating pathways for these lives to flourish, we turn promise into pressure. The challenge is not an absence of ambition. African governments already know many of their priorities: food, water, energy, infrastructure, education, health, manufacturing, the digital economy. The challenge is the narrowing space between what governments know what must be done and what their institutions and balance sheets allow them to do. For much of the post-independence period, development was narrated as a movement from giver to receiver, from experts to beneficiary, from the institution that they knew to the community expected to accept. That architecture produced important gains, and we should not dismiss them. But it also created fragmented projects and relationships that all too often ended when the funding cycle ended. We're now entering a much more complex era. Aid will continue to matter, particularly when markets cannot serve human need. But private investment, philanthropy, sovereign capital, universities, technology companies, city governments, and diaspora networks will increasingly shape what becomes possible. The task is not to replace one source with another. It's to build an architecture in which different forms of capital can act together without sacrificing public purpose. The challenge cannot be described simply as a shortage of capital. Capital exists. Knowledge exists. Projects exist. Talent exists. What too often is missing are the trusted relationships and mechanisms capable of bringing them together. And the African diaspora makes this visible with unusual clarity. Every year, billions of dollars cross oceans through remittances, not because of treaties or investment mandates, but because relationships already exist. Families support families. Communities support communities. The World Bank estimated that officially recorded remittances to sub-Saharan Africa reached approximately $56 billion in 2024. Other studies say that in 2026 it's about $100 billion. And it's interesting to note that since 2010, remittances on average were double foreign direct investment in the systems. That's the story that's not told. Remittances are relationship capital made visible, but they travel along pathways of responsibility, kinship, and belonging. Remittances cannot be the outer limit of our imagination. How might the trust that supports households also support enterprises, institutions, cities, and shared prosperity? How do we shift the diaspora from being seen primarily as passive remitters to being recognized as investors, knowledge partners, civic leaders, and co-creators of Africa's future? The wealth of the diaspora cannot be measured only in dollars. It resides in professional networks, technical knowledge, cultural fluency, political influence, and the ability to translate between worlds. I describe many of these people as Afropolitans, rooted in Africa but fluent in the world. Their value lies not in having left one place for another, but in the capacity to reduce the distance between places that institutions have often seen as separate or are afraid of. Through them, ideas can be adopted rather than simply imported. To harness that capacity, we have to imagine much more than appeals to heritage. After all, allies for shared prosperity are wide and diverse, and thankfully so. Sentiment may bring people to the door, but only credible institutions persuade them to remain. Diaspora investors need trustworthy opportunities, intelligible regulation, and partners capable of execution. Communities need assurance that investment will not extract from their knowledge whilst excluding them from its benefits. Yet trust remains expensive to move. Sending $200 to sub-Saharan Africa costs an average of approximately $15.80, 7.9%, against the goal target of 3%. So the capital is moving to these places in forms that are far too expensive. You must also frame the relationship correctly. This is not simply about the United States investing in Africa, or about Africa supplying resources or talent to the United States. Not the only one. The invitation is wider. It extends to everyone prepared to engage through respect, reciprocity, and a commitment to prosperity. Ghana offers a glimpse of what becomes possible when history, identity, and public policy are brought together. The 2019 year of return commemorated 400 years since the first enslaved Africans arrived in English North America. But Ghana did more than remember. It invited descendants of the African diaspora to return and reconnect. Through citizenship, cultural exchange, and the longer term, beyond the return program, Ghana began converting belonging into public architecture, transforming a commemorative moment into a continuing relationship. The lesson is not that every country should reproduce Ghana's model. It is that identity and memory, when supported by institutions, can become platforms for sustained collaboration. The same possibility exists between cities. Imagine Denver and Cape Town collaborating not because one requires assistance from the other, but because each possesses knowledge that the other needs. Imagine water knowledge developed in Windhoek, helping to shape resilience planning in Arizona. Imagine African cities understood not as laboratories for other people's ideas, but as producers of knowledge that the world urgently requires. This reversal matters. For too long, the language of international development has positioned African cities as sites of deficiency and external cities as sources of expertise. Yet Kigali has lessons to offer about public order and institutional focus. Cape Town's experience of extreme drought has produced knowledge that water-stressed cities everywhere now require. Informal settlements across the continent contain sophisticated systems of exchange, adaptation, and collective survival that conventional planning frequently fails to recognize. To say this is not to romanticize scarcity or to excuse institutional failure. It is to insist upon reciprocity. Every knowledge contains Every city, rather, contains knowledge and ignorance, innovation and inertia, competence and constraint. Real partnership begins when each city arrives prepared both to teach and to learn. The challenges on either side of the Atlantic are not identical, but they rhyme. Water insecurity, aging infrastructure, housing unaffordability, unemployment, inequality, climate risk, public health pressures, technological disruption, homelessness. These should not only be framed as developmental problems, they are grounds for shared inquiry and shared enterprise. They allow cities, businesses, universities, communities, and entrepreneurs to test new models together and develop solutions capable of traveling across borders. And to understand the scale of this opportunity, consider this. Ostensibly, one could say that Black America represents approximately $2.1 trillion in annual buying power. Organizing a small fraction of that economic capacity through trusted Africa-facing partnerships and institutions could create an incredible capital flow comparable to some of the world's most successful diaspora systems. Countries like India and Ireland are places where this has happened. Cities are the core vehicle of these flows. As an architect, I've learned to think about structure, what bears weight, what connects one element to another, and what fails when the connection is weak. A city is not merely a collection of buildings. It's an ecosystem of relationships between land, water, institutions and citizens, memory and aspiration. Its visible infrastructure depends upon an invisible architecture of agreements, habits, and trust. And when that invisible architecture fails, even a technically excellent project can stall. A municipality may identify the need, an investor may possess the capital, an engineer may know the solution, and a community may understand the local condition, yet the project remains unrealized because these actors do not share a trusted process. The missing infrastructure is not always the pipe, the road, or the power line. Sometimes it's the relationship that allows them to be built. Cities do not fail because they lack ideas. They often fail because the people, institutions, and capital capable of solving shared problems remain disconnected. The work before us is therefore not simply to help cities access finance. It's to strengthen the relationships through which finance, knowledge, and opportunity can circulate. It is to help each place recognize its assets, make its needs legible, and find peers with whom progress can accelerate. The relationship itself becomes infrastructure. This is not merely an African proposition or an American proposition, it's a human one. Climate adaptation, water security, artificial intelligence, housing affordability cannot be solved by isolated institutions acting independently. They require relationships across borders, disciplines, and generations. And this is why relational capital should not be mistaken for networking. Networking may expand the number of people we know. Relationship capital expands and increases what we're able to trust one another to do. It is built through shared experience, tested through mutual obligation, and sustained by reciprocity. Its value is revealed not in exchange of business cards, but in the quality of the action that becomes possible between us. Gatherings such as this one matter for precisely that reason. Their value cannot be measured only by attendance, applause, or the number of introductions exchanged. Their true value will be revealed later in the call that is returned, the city that finds a partner, the entrepreneur who gains a market, the investor who learns to see a possibility differently, the institution that chooses to remain engaged even after the lights in this room have been switched off. And this is why I address this in part of my own personal work, the notion of creating an operating system, which I call flow, through which cities, capital, knowledge, and communities can form relationships that are productive, accountable, and durable. All of us have a role. Investors can bring patience alongside capital. Universities can form long-term partnerships rather than episodic research projects. Businesses can build local capacity alongside market share. Cities can treat their peers as collaborators, not just as competitors. Members of the diaspora can convert their fluency between worlds into pathways others can travel. And those of us who build institutions must design them to hold trust, distribute value, and remain accountable to the communities in whose name we act. Perhaps this is the greatest lesson of my own transatlantic journey. The future will not be determined solely by those who possess the greatest wealth, the largest economies, or the most sophisticated technologies. It will belong to those who build the strongest relationships, because relationships generate trust. Trust gives capital the confidence to move. Capital directed by shared purpose enables innovation, and innovation strengthens our communities. I began by speaking about what makes the we, and therefore what makes the I. I return to that thought because none of us arrives at the future alone. We become pioneers not simply by going first, but by creating a path wide enough for others to travel with us. This gathering anticipated that possibility 20 years ago when it chose to create a dialogue around Africa's potential and its relationship with the diaspora. I believe in this project. I believe in the urgency of this moment, and I believe in the agency I see before me. A community capable of working together to find a path that allows every one of us, and ultimately all of humanity, to realize its fullest potential. For centuries, the Atlantic carried separation, extraction, and loss. Yet it also carried music, memory, resistance, imagination, and return. The ocean itself has not changed. What can change is the meaning of our crossing. We now have an opportunity to build an Atlantic that functions not primarily as a divide between continents, but as a connector between communities, markets, ideas, and institutions. An Atlantic across which knowledge travels in both directions, across which capital creates dignity rather than dependency, and across which cities discover that their futures are strengthened, not diminished, by the futures of others. Financial capital builds projects, human capital builds capability, natural capital sustains life, but relational capital is what allows them to come together. The future will not be simply built for us, it will be built by us. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, you are so welcome. So welcome. I think you're supposed to stay up here, aren't you? Yes, you are supposed to stay up here. Let's keep it going, please, for Mokana Mukeka. Please, please. Absolutely. You know, Mokana has invited us to imagine a larger future. And now we have the opportunity to even go deeper, to ask questions. And so one of those ways we are going to do that is I'm going to invite Papa Ja up to the stage for a conversation with Mr. Mukeka. So before and as they're coming up, I want to make sure you see that QR code. Once they are done with their discussion, there will be an opportunity for your questions to be asked. That QR code on the screen and the one that is in your program will help you do that. So without further ado, Papa Ja, please take it away.
Thank you, Glo. And again, thank you so much. It's truly an honor. Now we want to dive deep into some question, and we want to build enough time for the audience to engage. As Glo mentioned, please use the QR code, send your question, and we'll have Jason to read it out loud. But we'll make sure we leave enough time for that. So I'll dive in with the first question. One thing that you mentioned is, with the idea at the center of your keynote, when you say relational capital, what exactly do you mean, and how is it different from networking?
Thank you for the question, and I also hope I didn't go on for too long, and maybe perhaps not too repetitive. The challenge that I found is that networking is transactional and somewhat temporal. So you get the business card, you exchange, you say, I need to talk to this person. Relational capital is about building the relationship, which is different to networking, which can often be just about extracting. Often when we think of business transactions or the development of any major project, it's through a referral. A friend who you've known for years who said, this is the person to help you. Somebody who says, you need to work with this organization, I've seen this. That is a form of relational capital because that opportunity is built upon relationships that have happened over time. I spoke before about the attention deficit that we have in this generation. There's a surfeit of information available to us. You can Google, you can scribe, you can find whatever you want, but it's very difficult to know what is the quality interaction that is out there. And it's only through relationships that we're able to decipher through all of the complexity of the current age what is meaningful and what is less meaningful. I think there are practical implications for this. You know, for example, I've been advising African cities who have said that they want to work with American cities. But then they would say these are our projects that are investable. I'd say, yes, but what is your relationship to that city? I said, have you ever considered that a city such as New Orleans probably has something in common with a city such as Durban? Because maybe they share similar environmental challenges. Maybe they have a diaspora population that sends remittances. Maybe there's a relationship capital that has not been realized. So if you as a city, Durban, why don't you write a letter to New Orleans? And vice versa, why don't you see who your partners are? So relationship capital is about having a deep understanding of where there's existing traction for possibility. Whereas networking can be somewhat, well, I like this, I'd like that, I need to extract that. And it can produce quick results, But in my experience, if you build on relations, the return compounds over time, whereas a networking exercise, you might struggle to find the same sort of results in resources. So it's really about thoughtful relationships rather than the purely transactional relationships. Yeah.
I know it's another whole day conversation talking about that, but there's another thing you mentioned is trust.
Yes.
You describe trust as an invisible infrastructure. What does that infrastructure look like when it is not working, and what happens when it's missing?
Well, I'll give you some very practical examples. So I've done work looking at the challenges of partnerships between Africa and the United States, and I've met many investors who said they would love to build a house in Ghana, they'd love to build a house in Ivory Coast, etc. They send money to the family, they get sent photos back that here's your house, they fly in and arrive there and there's no house because the families have used the money or done other sorts of things. So trust that's a dimension of trust. And when I spoke to this investor, they desperately wanted to reinvest in Africa, but they said, but I don't trust it. I don't trust the systems and the ecosystem. I don't even trust my relatives to do this. So the problem with that trust deficit is that it's up to actors on the continent to respond to this. So I spoke with Standard Bank, for example, who does a lot of work in land transfer and so on, and I said, you need to be more engaged in some of these issues because the lack of trust is now causing these sorts of problems. So I would say that trust can be quite literally the difference between an investor deciding to invest in one country versus the other one. And the difficulty is it's intangible because it's these stories which are not empirical, but it's the stories that we hear about at a barbecue, stories we hear at dinner, places where you're told don't go. And I think we have to be far much more conscious about the importance of creating a counter-narrative to these sorts of spaces. So trust needs to be built. When it does work, it's some of those elements that I mentioned, accountability, ensuring that there's a deep relationship, ensuring that your success hinges on the success of the investor and the counterpart on the table. It's not a win-lose situation, it's a win-win situation. And trust also is an act that is continual. So I say this because just because you have a trustful relationship a year ago doesn't mean that it'll be there forever. Trust is a continuous act of investment, of care, of duty, of paying attention to what does shared prosperity look like. And I want to be honest with you. When I thought about this keynote, I was tempted to rattle off a number of statistics which are safe and so on. But I decided to deal with the sticky thing that we can't hold on to, this issue of trust, this issue of relationship capital, because it's often the missing component in all of the deals that I've seen. I've seen money struggle to get across the line. I've seen banks not approve projects. I've seen developers saying, I'm tearing my hair out for 3 years, I'm trying to get this off the ground. I have everything in place, what's missing? It's the trust factor. And I think it's important that we, on both sides of the Atlantic, if we acknowledge it up front, as a potential obstacle to the realization of our objectives, and we build trust with as much care as we build the balance sheet, then I think we're going to have better projects.
This is something we can all relate to. So you have a very interesting way of describing the Atlantic and everything that went through that. So you showed us that a powerful network already stretched across the Atlantic.
Yeah.
Carrying knowledge, capital, cultural fluency, and influence. What institutions are needed to help that network carry opportunity at scale?
Well, we need an ecosystem of institutions, right? And because the complexity of this challenge and opportunity cannot be achieved through any one actor, nor will it fail because of any one actor. So you need your state institutions to do what they need to do. You require formal governance, whether it's local government, state level, or national government. That is definitely one tier of action. The other one is forums such as this, the work that you're doing, where you are effectively acting as a glue between capital and societies and family. We need more institutions such as yours. We need to support what you're doing much, much more, because I think that these are underinvested places for unlocking potential. And then we could talk about other tiers of actors. Obviously, business is a particular player there. We could say the same of universities and so on. But I'm particularly interested in the institutions that are building relational capital, which I would argue that's what you're doing. It's the connective tissue between these different entities that don't often talk to each other. as an academic, I've seen this also in academic spaces where academia will not trust a grant from government and say that and we have to act as the glue and say, government is not your enemy, let's see how we can work with them. And I've seen government officials say, academics just want to waste their money. So being in between these conversations, being a translator, being multilingual, as you are, is exactly what the world needs. The world needs more multilingual, agile people who understand Africa, who understand America, who understand community and so on, because with all of the complexity of the world right now, people retreat into their silos, and that produces fragmentation, and that produces lack of collaboration. So the ecosystem fixers, people like you, are essential for this. I have a venture which, it's fairly young, it's nowhere near 20 years. I'm so envious of you in what you're doing. Mine is only a year old. But I'm focused on this question of how do cities become the glue for these sorts of interactions, particularly because if you look at the demographics of the African continent, you know, the median age is, depending on what statistics you look at, it's anything between 19 and 29. It's very clear that by the year 2050, the world's workforce will largely be African. 1 out of 4 people will be African. These are both consumers and producers. So we have to ask ourselves, if you're doing a 10 to 12-year project, or you're thinking about the life of your children, the world that they're going to inherit is going to be very different to the world of today. So that means that if we're thoughtful about the future, this relationship building, these ecosystem builders, we cannot afford a world where Africa is an afterthought in the global discourse. It's not going to work. And likewise, we cannot afford powerful countries, such as America and others, to think that they can work without the world. It's not going to work. So the bridge builders are, to use a religious reference, are the holy ones, such as you. Yeah.
Thank you. I hope you're using the QR code to send in your question. So Jason, I will just ask this last question and hope to turn it over to you I want to make sure we leave enough time for questions from the audience. You highlighted the gap between the million of young Africans entering the labor market and the number of formal jobs being created. How can relational capital help create real pathway into work, enterprises, and most importantly, dignity?
That's a whole conference. However, I do want to highlight a couple of things just for the sake of the audience to land. So there's been a lot of discussion that entrepreneurship will solve Africa's problems. I want to be very clear, not every person is built to be an entrepreneur. If you look at the average 10 people, maybe 2 people can be an entrepreneur, let's be honest. And even of those 2, maybe 1 will be successful. So we have to start thinking of economic structures in which we support entrepreneurs, but we ask ourselves, where are the jobs going to come from? Secondly, opportunity should not be limited to where you're located. I've spoken to drone operators in Uganda who said they're collaborating with people in Ukraine. So we need to start getting to the mindset that you can be in one place and you can participate elsewhere. Think of remote working. It's a global phenomenon right now. The challenge, I think, is when our African governments, I use ours, so I take responsibility for this too, often look at the challenge of their developmental issues and assume that they can fix it with their resources, as opposed to saying, okay, I'm in Rwanda or I'm in Kenya, I have an amazing high school education or graduates who are working in AI. How can those kids tap into Silicon Valley? How can they tap into East Asia? How can they tap into other African countries? This skills shortage, job shortage, is often because people are looking at a small pie to solve the big problem. But you can look at a bigger pie when you accept difference, when you are taught that working with people of different nationalities and different culture can be to your advantage. And this is why I made the point about nativism. The problem with nativism is that not only does it shrink your cultural thinking, but it shrinks your ability to imagine possibility with people who are not the same as you. And that is difficult. If I'm selling hamburgers and I decide to only sell to one person, I'm not going to have the same business as somebody says I'll sell to everybody. And I think in some ways that simple metaphor is what is required for us to solve the challenge of the African continent. I remember, and just in closing, I was asked at one point, well, you know, you working abroad, are you encouraging our kids to leave Africa and make other countries rich? And then I made the point about remittances. I said it's not as simple as being here or being elsewhere. If you look at the history of America, if you look at the Irish immigration that came into this country, Italians, other society, these are people who've left their homeland, come here, created a new life, have incredible relationships. So I think the more Africans see the world as their platform for expression, as well as their countries, and we should not teach our Africans kids to feel trapped or to think that they can only make a business down the street, or to think. We want our children to think big. We want them to imagine that you could be in Kinshasa and one day you could have a satellite launching from Seoul in Korea. So yeah, I think there's a bit of a challenge about how we define opportunity and the problem. And frankly, a lot of our governments need our help to help them imagine what is possible, to help them imagine public-private partnerships for infrastructure investment, to help banking institutions to think, well, you know what, actually I can get more of a return in Africa than I can get on the S&P. There was a beautiful article that came out just the day from Forbes, which showed how certain African markets overperform the S&P. That story is not told. So the moment we begin to market some of these to external investment into our own citizens, I think we can change that dynamic. So I do think there's a bit of a crisis of the imagination. There are practical problems, but we need to work on our imagination in order to get to where we need to be. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Jason so he can read some of the questions we have in the audience.
And you all, as usual, did not disappoint. Goodness. I don't know how I can get to all of these. Listen, one question comes in. How can first-generation immigrants, the children of immigrants who have the desire to go back and connect and invest our competence and resources into Africa, make sure that we go about it in the right way? Also, what opportunities do you have for those of us youth that are interested and want to connect?
Well, is that for me or for?
I believe you are the man of the hour.
I will respond. So I described a statistic before about how remittances are actually double aid that goes into Africa. And people say, how is that the case? Aid, because it's concentrated, you can see its results, but because remittances are distributed, it's very difficult to see its results. So what I would encourage young people to do is to aggregate. So I think cities should have chapters, communities where people of first generation, they gather. I mean, I've done work with NYU, for example. They have a fantastic community of young African graduates from very different countries, and they're all coordinating about investing. So whether they're in Liberia, Senegal, Uganda, etc., they meet together as first generation immigrants and say, now how do we invest back in the continent? So reducing the fragmentation, I think, is an important part of it. Having organizations such as this that bring us together, encouraging the youth to see beyond their national categories and to see themselves, first of all, as humans, secondly, as Americans if they are, or dual citizenship, and then thirdly, as Africans. But the moment you can bring these groups together, it makes much more sense. I mean, I spoke to 10 graduates at NYU. All of them were saying they wanted to invest back in Africa. And I said, do you know if the 10 of you pulled your resources, you could get this type of project in Africa? They never thought of it because everybody's thinking in a fragmented fashion. Everyone's thinking about my own family. If 10 people come together, if 100 people come together and say, we're going to focus on Ghana for next year, and the next year we're going to focus on Senegal, and the next year we're going to focus on Ivory Coast, and you can, across 54 years, you can create a program where you decide to target a particular country, and if you just get 100 people focused on that particular country's opportunities, it's far much more effective than a fragmented, I need to fix my grandmother's roof because it's leaking type of project. Yeah. So we are highly fragmented, and I think we have to think differently about it. Yeah.
Papa, if you have questions, you're going to have to jump in and fight for it because there is tons of questions.
Is that a good sign or a bad sign?
That's great. Listen, one super interesting question. It says, you're an architect by training, and your whole framing is spatial, invisible infrastructure,
Yes.
connective tissue, lowering friction.
Yeah.
How does designing physical spaces shape the way you think about building relational capital? Is there a design principle that carries over?
It's a very good question. It's a story of my career. So let me answer that by stating my career started as an architect, designing specific buildings. And I did very well, won a number of awards for that. I then realized that I could fix a building, but I couldn't fix a community through one building.
So I started to get involved in urban planning. That was good. Now I was designing neighborhoods, I was designing cities. My largest project was essentially designing a community of 30,000 people. And I was in charge of a vision for a city 30 years ahead. Very complex. But even in that space, I realized that in designing the city, I was divorced from the capital space and the policy space. So I realized even I had a team of 20 different engineers and our project was worth billions, we couldn't get the job done. I worked in now the policy space because I realized some of the challenges there were, political and so on. And ultimately, that's where I'm at right now with this piece about relationship capital, is that I will always be an architect. I can execute a building, no problem. But in terms of the efficacy of my intellect and where it needs to be deployed, I can easily spend 5 years doing one building, or I can spend 3 years helping 20 cities collaborate to make 1,000 buildings. So in some ways, it still feels like architecture to me. It is still spatial. And I wouldn't be able to think in this way if it wasn't for being an architect, because I can understand how things are connected and relate to each other. The technical side, the policy side, the regulation side, the human capital side. But to be precise, it's not that I want to diminish architecture, and my architecture friends will be very upset with me. It's just that I think architecture is ultimately about designing human relationships in space. The way that you define how a room connects to a kitchen, to a bedroom, to the back, it's not just walls, you're actually shaping how people interact with each other. And if you imagine that at the level of the city, think of the apartheid city, think of redlining, think of the ways in which infrastructure can be used to either create or limit opportunity. That to me is still architecture.
Well said. Listen, I'm gonna, let me just say, on the question platform, there's an opportunity to rate questions, thumbs up, and I'm gonna start using that to decide because I'm getting overwhelmed by these questions. One question that came in that says, love your optimism about the possibility for economic engagement in Africa, but what are your cautions?
Well, let's put it this way. First of all, I've been burnt, right? So let me get that clear. That for all of my successes, there have often been 2 or 3 failures. So you have to kind of accept a bit of an attrition rate. That's the first thing. The other caution is, and this is a mistake that I've learned to own. I would meet with people who were not necessarily ethical or had the best intentions for a project. And I would struggle and be confused. Why are they like that? And was I naive in not seeing that? And I realized that I actually prefer being naive. I prefer in believing in the potential of people. I prefer believing in the potential of Africa and people of African descent and African allies. And if somebody abuses that trust, I no longer feel hurt. I think it's a reflection on them. And I keep moving. I'll give you one very real example of this. This project I was doing for 30,000 people, which was for affordable housing in Cape Town, which would have completely transformed the central city. It would have allowed people who've been previously displaced an opportunity. I did that presentation to a panel like this, 800 people, financiers, city officials, mayors, and so on. I left the stage and I was packing up, and then now it was a caucus meeting, so we had a discussion. And this conservative person put their hand up and said, I don't like this project. So I'm like listening, like, why is this? And she said, who are these poor people going to vote for? So in my mind, I was trying to create a project for 30,000 people. She was worried those are 30,000 people who are going to vote her out. The project did not proceed. Now, was it a mistake to make that presentation? I don't think so. Should I have changed my approach to accommodate the forces of capital that actually didn't want affordable housing? I don't think so. I did the right thing. And I actually forgave that person because, not accepted, but I forgave her, this counselor, because I recognized that she's trapped in the prism of scarcity and could not imagine a city that could serve all of its citizens, and was just worried that 30,000 black people are going to come in and vote for somebody else. So you will always encounter, even with your best intentions, people who are fearful who have nefarious intentions. And because I don't think that way, I'm unable to predict it. so I often get surprised. But that's my response to that question is you will not win every fight, but it's important to fight the good fight.
There are some really good ones here. I'm going to throw you a hot potato now. Don't remittances cause dependence and disrupt the economy in Africa?
Well, it's not a binary. I wouldn't say yes and I wouldn't say no. I think there have been instances when remittances have been incredibly powerful. I can think of certain banks that are, again, in Kenya, there's some really strong innovations where they've done some really good work to allow for remittances to come into the country to support things such as housing, etc. Very positive work. I've also seen other places where the remittances disappear. I've seen other places where at the individual family level that it gets lost. So I don't think it's a yes or no thing, but I think that goes to the trust dimension. I think remittances are important, but I think at some point remittances will evolve to real relational capital. I think of St. Patrick's Day, and I'm always amazed how some people from Ireland come into America to celebrate St. Patrick's Day, etc. That's a very modern form of remittance. You're not just sending money back home, but it's an event. It's something it's a cultural event. It's exchange. I think of musicians from Africa traveling abroad, or I think of American musicians traveling. It's a different type of remittance. So in my mind, if we think of remittances, it shouldn't just be I'm sending money home to my family, but it's what is that cultural and economic exchange that allows things to happen. And I think the gains far outweigh the negatives. India has been very, very thoughtful about this in ways that has completely transformed their economy. And also to the benefit of their citizens, or let's call it first-generation Indians in America. They're doing exceptionally well. But if you actually track the way that they deal with their relational capital, it's very sophisticated. The Irish, there are many societies that do this in a thoughtful way. I remember when Joe Biden was shown the plaque about his Irish origins, and I thought that was both poignant and emotional, but also very strategic. The point was, you are connected to this place. And that forms the relationship capital for other things to emerge, whether it's music, festivals, art, society. So no, I don't think it's entirely negative. I think, like any financial exchange, we have to be thoughtful about waste and, penury and so on. But overall, the benefits are good.
The writer of this question said Africa, but they could have just as well said America. But the question is this. As AI reshapes the global workforce, how should Africa, or America, redesign its education system to prepare students for the jobs of tomorrow rather than the jobs AI will automate and eliminate?
That's a hard one. It's such a hard one. I wrote a short paper on this, and I was grappling with this issue because one of the things that I explained to as AI conference, I explained that one of the problems with Africa is because of poverty, time is a premium which we take for granted. So for example, if you are a domestic worker who has to travel 3 hours to get into the city to do some work and so on, and that's 3 hours one way, 3 hours the other way, that's 6 hours of your day. Now if you compare that to somebody else who has close proximity to resources, they might get 5 hours back. Now, hear me out on this. So what it means is that certain cities which have good infrastructure and good systems in place are ready-made for AI adoption. Other cities have infrastructure challenges. Some cities have power supply problems. Some cities have irregular power supply issues. Some cities, because they are operating or communities rather, are operating at the lower end of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you're more concerned about eating and getting through the day than opening up ChatGPT to start your business plan. So my problem is that, AI is being sold to Africa as if it's going to help us. I'm like, it's going to help the 1% who already have access to these features. And the role of government, first of all, they should accelerate their infrastructure investment. But if I was government, I would treat AI, I'm going to call it an existential threat, but an existential opportunity. I would say, I need to help my people with this opportunity. So I'm going to make a strategy for reliable power supply, data centers in rural areas, in sorts of areas. I'm going to bring compute to the people. I'm going to talk to the Anthropics and the OpenAIs and all these organizations and say, you want our green critical minerals in DRC? That's fine, but I need a local compute facility here. And I want that local compute facility to have preferential, compute credits for my citizens. That's going to help. The idea that a kid is just going to go on Google and then download the latest app and suddenly make a business through AI, I think is extremely privileged and actually ignorant of the extent of the challenges that we face. So I think in the old days, governments in the past would say we need water, we need bridges, we need railroads. AI requires that same urgency. How do we bring compute to our citizens? It is the same degree of developmental challenge as experienced in the 1960s or 70s about roads. The way everybody spoke about we need roads in Africa. So our citizens need compute.
Listen, you've got a great speaker on stage when he's starting to answer the questions before you even ask them. There are questions in this chat about, lots of questions about the youth population and what that potential really means. You touched on that. There's a great question in the chat about what heads of states in Africa should do, and I think you just laid out a very vivid example there. Papa, I'm going to drag you in on this one as well. There's a question that says, what are the most effective strategies for engaging people and raising awareness about the resources that exist already? I'll extend that question of what we can do with what we already got. Papa, let's hear from you.
I mean, he talked about it, relationship. If you look in this room, we have people from so many different backgrounds, so many different professions, that I can guarantee you that every single one of you, I built a relationship with you. I can name you by your name, and we spent time together, we had coffee together. So, and I think for me, it's because nobody has it all. If you want to help your community, you got to build a relationship. And it's not just with the decision makers, but it's got to be with everybody, because I'm a firm believer that every single person you meet can add value in your life. It might not be for you, but it could be something that your community needs. For me, you spend a lot of time talking about relationship and trust. For me, that's what it boils down to.
Yeah, related. It says, somebody caught what you were saying, give us more on a future built by us, not for us. They want to hear more on that.
Well, I mean, I spoke about how not everybody's an entrepreneur. I spoke about how not everybody's an entrepreneur, and I don't want to sound negative. I think entrepreneurship needs to be widened in terms of how we define it. There are institution builders. We need more of those. There are the translators who move between different worlds and bring understanding. I think the world that needs to be built by us is understanding that we require these different actors to work together. The world that will be built by us is a world in which we recognize we cannot do these things alone. I mean, as Papa can attest, when we was discussing my involvement here, I said to him, maybe I'm giving this away. I said, Papa, I'm setting up something and I want you to partner on it. So our conversation wasn't even just about being here today. I'm looking beyond today and building a relationship between my fledgling organization and his. And I think it's that spirit of curiosity and openness and collaboration that I think is essential. So when I say built by us, we have to build these networks. We also shouldn't expect them to give returns immediately. Some of my best collaborations have happened with somebody who I met 3 years ago, developed a relationship. We both knew we wanted to do something, but 3 years later it came up. That's the difference between networking and relationship capital. A networker will meet somebody, 2 weeks later look at the business card and say, I don't know who this person is. Do I need them now? And then a year later forget them. A person who builds relationship capital will consciously curate a field, if you will, and say, this person does this person does that. One day I might be useful to that person. Or one day they might be helpful to me. And I think it's building a culture of connection. And maybe the subtext of my whole paper was this, is that with all of the technology we have right now, which makes us think we're connected, whether it's Facebook or X or Fox or whatever it might be, these technologies are increasing our fragmentation and the illusion of connection. So what we have to do is to be very thoughtful about connection. You know, a city like New York, which I love, is by all measures the loneliest city in the world. But at the same time, it has the most opportunity. That paradox is because of an underinvestment in relationship and an overinvestment in quick fixes and sporadic engagement. So the future that will be built by us is a future in which we work towards it systematically and with patience. I would even dare I say it with love, with care, with empathy, and not expecting that the person across the table is going to be beneficial to you in the first 10 minutes when you meet them. But actually you're investing in somebody who might transform your life 5 years later.
So Jay, I got to fight to squeeze in this question. I'm sorry, man.
I'm sorry.
I got to ask this. You say the real value of gathering like this comes later. Imagine that is now 2030. What will tell you that this summit and the relationship began here truly succeed?
Oh, wow. Well, first of all, I'm going to be very selfish when I answer that question. I'm hoping that 2030, when apparently he has like this infamous and amazing barbecue that he always does at the end of these things, right? I just heard about it by mistake.
That was Abu, I know that.
So if I'm invited to the barbecue, that means I'm a good friend by 2030. I think by 2030, if we can collectively point to projects together, and maybe we point to 5 and we say 2 failed and 2 look like it's cool, but 1 is amazing, that's success. I think we chase success so much that sometimes we don't learn from failure. So my point is, I just want to do something with you. It may work, it may not work. Let's see what it does. I encourage you here also to be the same. Any business that has a 30% success rate is actually not that bad. So be patient if certain things don't work out, but make sure that the 30% that carries you forward works. So 2030, I hope a third of this room have done something together. That's success.
Papa, I'm going to turn that back on you because McKenna continues to make the point of mindset. And there's a great question in here about like what is an effective way to counter this scarcity mindset. And I'm asking you because you came here with nothing but hope and ambition for a job to send money home. And here you are 20 years later having built not an organization, an institution.
Beautiful.
That if the community woke up tomorrow and you weren't here, everyone would feel it. That's the difference between an institution and an organization. So how? You're the example we can see. How do we overcome this scarcity mindset? How can we see a vision that is far beyond what the reality suggests?
Wow. Well, and I can speak for me, for my example, what I've been through. Growing up in Africa, I never had a notion of dream, a notion of possibility, right? Because usually in Africa, your fate is designed before even you were born. Because if you were born in a poor family, that is it, right? So when I came to America, they say when I realized for the first time the notion of dream, meaning possibility, meaning accomplishment, achieving things, I think for me, we have to focus more on the children. It's about getting them involved in the right environment. And right now, it is scary because, and I said this, in my own household, my daughter is upstairs, she's texting her older sister downstairs. So relationships are not built. Our kids are not involved in environment where they communicate, where they talk to each other, where they engage with adult. Mentorship is fading away. So for me, in 2030, I want to see a young person running this organization, this institution. They are bright, smart, but sometimes we just don't allow them to see that possibility. And it's on every single one of us. Wherever you are in a corporation, you are a successful business person, think about who are those young people that you can mentor, that you can. I remember we used to have office day where you take your children to spend a whole day with you at work. So I think we got to go back and focus more on the children. For me, that's what I hope to see a few years from now.
Yep. I have the microphone, so I'm going to take a point of personal privilege real quick. Sometimes scarcity isn't a mindset. Sometimes scarcity is real, right? So, anybody feel like crying? Listen, Papa told me stories about chasing his next meal. Papa told me stories about 25 or so kids in the house. I didn't cry. He told me about having to wait till his brother comes home from school so he could put on the uniform and the shoes and go to school. I didn't cry about that. You know when I cried? When he told me that one of his uncles burned his school books in the fire for heat. And here he was just trying to get an education. Sometimes scarcity isn't a mindset. Sometimes it's real, and we have to overcome that too.
Yep.
Absolutely. Here's a really good one. Papa, this is for you. McKenna, this is for you too. How can I go to Africa and attempt to connect and try to help address concerns and be in this foreign country, but without seeming or sounding or appearing pompous or arrogant? I do not want to sound like a know-it-all, but I do want to bring my knowledge and experiences to the table. So there's a balance. I like the honesty of this question here. What say you?
Well, and I don't know if you know this, for the last 5 years, every year I take a delegation to Senegal, and you will hear more about it for the afternoon panel. I think if you want to go to Africa, it got to start here. You got to build those relationships here. So don't go to Africa alone, because you're going to have those culture shocks, you're going to have those culture barriers. So establish the relationship, know people, engage, be in the community, have a sense of what is needed. And quite often, we make those mistakes. We see somebody sitting on the street, we assume that they are poor. And sometimes part of it is culture. Eating at 5 p.m., having your lunch is culture. And sometimes people will assume certain things. I think building the relationship here, getting a small feel about the African culture before going. Now, once you make it there, I highly, highly advise you to listen more than you speak. Highly. Don't see everything through the lens of the United States. Things might be uncomfortable for you the same way it is still uncomfortable for us to live in this country. But we adjust. We build things over time. We are patient. So those are the things that you need to practice. Go listen more than you speak. Practice patience. Also respect cultures. It's important.
McKenna, jump in, please. Thank you, Papa.
My good friend has said everything. I don't think I can add any value. All I would say is, what you also don't want, I would say, is to have expertise and then to be shy about sharing it, right? Or because I've seen the opposite side. I've seen people come in and they're very bullish and we can fix this, and it doesn't work because they're not listening. And then I've seen people come in and maybe listen too much. In other words, they end up being the problem, because now they're participating. A direct example, I know one businessman who, I won't mention the country because it's not fair, but we're saying they love this country because it's corrupt, but I understand the corruption and I get exactly what I want. So that person is now making it worse because they've kind of gamed the system. So I do think there's a fine balance between. So come in ethically. That's the only thing I would say. So you must listen. You must be respectful. You must be purposeful, but also just respect the place that you're in. When you go into somebody's house, you respect their house, whether it's America or Africa or elsewhere. So all we would want is for that expertise to not come in and take advantage of some of the weaknesses of the continent, which can lead to corruption and so on. I mean, that's a real thing. And some people say, well, that's the only way it works, is the only way to make business. But these things erode the foundation of Africa's development. So that's all I would say. Listen, but be ethical. Yeah.
Listen, that we appreciate the candor. Let's extend the keep it real session. All right, we're in the circle of trust. Yes. Yes. All right. So go further. We want to know honestly, what are the perceptions of Africans about African Americans and the black community here and the black culture here? Because we know there's a gap in understanding, and you all have had to bear the perceptions that we have held when you get here. But tell us a little about what y'all be thinking of us.
Well, look, and that's a very good question. This is something I deeply, deeply care about. I'm the first one to raise my hand to admit the fact that before I came to this country, my perception toward African American was gang, violence, because that's what I was shown on TV. Everything they show me on TV was related to that lifestyle. In fact, when I was getting ready to come to America, I was told to stay away from the black people. Literally. Literally. And I did until, and I started my career at the bank, until a brother changed my life. Some of you might know him, Derek Brown. A mentor of mine came to me very excited to see a black person behind the tail line. Came and introduced himself, took me to lunch, and I hesitated before I go, because I didn't know where he was taking me. To be quite honest, that totally changed my perception. I get involved in, where's Brandon Willis? I hope he's here in the room somewhere. Yes, B. We end up working together in the Black Network group at the bank at Wells Fargo, and and look, he's a brother of mine. We play soccer, we go back 25 years. And today, one of the things I care the most is our initiative breaking barriers and building bridges between the black community and the African immigrant community. I live by this, to the point I take African American to Africa. Now, it goes the other way around. I took an Uber and I asked, the driver was an African American. I asked him, oh, have you been to the motherland? He was offended. Yes. That's not my motherland. I'm not, yes, but I understand where he was coming from. And the honest truth is there is misconception on both sides. And this is what the African Leadership Group does. We break those barriers, we break those walls, and today look who you have in this room. I'll turn it over to you, brother.
Well, you opened up the floor by making the space for us to say that it's okay to cry. It's a very emotional question that you're asking there. And I'll tell you why. So I grew up here as a child until I was 13 in an African household, but there were no other Africans around. So I thought I was African American. And I grew up amongst African Americans, but the African Americans kept reminding me I wasn't part of them. And this was during the 80s, so it was a very tough and aggressive time. I can mention the various number of interesting insults that are said to young African kids, but this is being recorded, so I'm not going to do that. It was extremely complex culturally, and I can say with comfort that I was probably in a fight every 3 days. I would scrap because people would say stuff about my name and this, and it's like, so, but that doesn't mean that I didn't love or see myself as part of the African American community. I mean, I grew up amongst them, you read the history and all of that, And I remember when Barack Obama was elected, I was back in South Africa, I cried watching on the news. My friend's like, why are you crying? And I'm like, you don't understand what this means. Right. You don't understand, because you don't know, you don't understand what it means. And he looked at me, and then thankfully the picture panned and Jesse Jackson was crying. Then I said, that's what it means. And they still looked at me, oh, okay, whatever. You know, so there's that dimension. And then I think of George Floyd. So we were in Africa and we're seeing this thing happening, and I cried when I watched the video. It wasn't because I'm related to him. I just knew what was happening. And we cried. And then afterwards, I remember there was some photos of the Democrats with dashikis. I think Nancy Pelosi and others, and they were kneeling. This caused a huge uproar back home. Some of my Ghanaian friends are like, why are they wearing this? They don't know what it is. They should use their own culture. So there was a lot of anger. And I said, how can you not have empathy for how people who have been divorced from their roots are trying to find bridges back home, and you reject them in that moment because they don't know what a daishiki means? Like, how cruel can you be? And he said, no, but they shouldn't wear that cloth. They should wear this. I said, you have the height of privilege because you understand what the cloth means to you. For them, it means something else. And for me, I think that was one of the most noble gestures. It might seem clumsy. It might have seemed strange to be kneeling in an African cloth. But I felt that because I knew the sentiment, where it was coming from. So the question is, how do we look at African Americans? My particular narrative is maybe not the norm. As far as I'm concerned, I really don't see the difference. We're all brothers and sisters. We have slightly different histories, but there's so many things that are common, from the hair to the cornrows to the food to the this to the dancing to the rhythm. It's like it feels like cousins as far as I'm concerned. But because I know our history, remember I've been here as a kid, I do know the person who says I have nothing to do with Africa. I mean, I heard Cameron, the MC, the other day, make some comment that he has nothing to do with Africa. He's from Jersey. I'm like, okay, well that's genetically interesting. But that's his reality, and that's a proportion of society that will always feel that way. And I'm not here to convert Cameron and suddenly say, come home to sub-Saharan Africa, or come home to Morocco, or come to Ethiopia, and come to Kenya, and come to West Africa, and come to the Congo, and all of this is you. I mean, if the ancestors haven't spoken to him yet, maybe it'll happen in heaven, or maybe it'll happen in 10 years' time. It's okay. But I do want to say, if I can say on behalf of, I don't want to speak on behalf of Africans, that's arrogant. If I could say that we have our own traumas from colonization. We have our own insecurities because of poverty. We hold our heads up high even though we have very little. So when Africans look at African Americans who seem to have a lot, we do sometimes wonder, with all of that you have, why can't you do more? Without understanding the constraints on the African American body. Does that make sense? Yeah. Like somebody in Windhoek or South Africa doesn't quite understand, how is it that police are shooting you? Like, shoot them back. Do you know what I mean? And it's difficult to explain. It's not that easy. It's not quite that easy. And then I've met African Americans who said, "You guys didn't fight for us. You left us. We were taken to the Caribbean. We were taken to the Americas. Why didn't you guys get on a ship and come and get us?" And we're like, fair question, but also unfair. It's also not that easy, right? There's a thing called the English Empire. and this is where I go back to this question of relational capital and why I use the metaphor of the ocean, because I was thinking about this keynote and how to make it resonate and for the audience and for you. And I said, how do I convert this body of water, which represents horror for many people, and distance. And some of us have to literally fly across that ocean to come here to be today. So the Atlantic is a real thing. But how do we make this Atlantic a connector? And I don't really have the full answer to it, but I think if we do that, then there's a chance that we can all work together. And in closing, on the slides, some of my slides, I would say, Black Americans. I was, okay, that's it. African Americans. I said, it's like, you know what? People of African descent. Not because I'm trying to be politically correct, but I'm trying to not fall into a category that might have burdens that aren't helpful. So all my literature, I talk about African descent, because that incorporates the immigrant, it incorporates African American. If you say you're from Jersey, it's great, you're still of African descent.
Right. Listen, time for one more question before we have a delicious lunch for everybody. And I'm going to hopefully do a smooth handoff to Glo, who will close us out. But to the panelists, what's your mindset walking into lunch right now? I mean, you talk a good game about social capital. You talk a good game about networking. You talk about a good game about building relationships. What's your mindset as you walk through this sea of people and into lunch at an event like this?
When I look at the room, I only see power and possibilities. We have people that came from out of state, people that came from Africa, people from so many different backgrounds that sat through a morning to listen to this conversation. It tells me you believe in this. It tells me that you care. Because a lot of people reach out. Can I still come? Yes, you can still come. Now, when we walk out of this room, obviously there's a lot of challenges that are waiting on us right by the door. Right by the door. It could be, I gotta go pick up my kids from school. It could be something happened at my business. It could be a lot of things that will stop you from believing in what you believe in now. I tell everybody, life is not easy. And sometimes it's not fair. But we gotta fight. So just in answer to your question, I'll walk out to this room and continue the fight. You know what's even great about this? I have a brother that I just met. Somebody that's going to join the army with all of us. As long as we stick together, we'll be fine.
All I will say is I agree. And I yield to his wisdom.
Listen, you all were so great with these questions. We're going to use this same platform for the afternoon conversation, and it's going to be just as dynamic. I want to thank you so much, and I want to give you back into the hands of our wonderful MC. Give it up for Glo.
Thank you. Keep it going for Jason, and of course for the phenomenal. Let me just say this, and I don't know about y'all, so because y'all know me, I'm real, y'all. That was the best conversation I have ever heard on Black folks and Africans. The best conversation, because it is things that I have heard separately. It is things that even growing up you would hear, the ignorance, the misunderstandings, and to really not feel like you're a part of the continent. Like, hell, where do you think you came from? Right? I marvel at people, because I am truly a child of the one-drop rule. If you got one drop of black, you black. Black is dominant. I've got many people in my family who are Hispanic, and they say, I don't know what to do with this hair. And I said, good luck, baby, because you married black. That hair's gonna kink up. Right? So you gotta know how to do, you can straighten it all you want to. Let some water hit it. So all of this is extremely valuable, and it even took me to the point where I thought, you know what? I'm thinking about, I'm emceeing and I'm public speaking in this country. I need to think bigger. I could be emceeing and keynoting in Africa. My diaspora is bigger than, God can dream a bigger dream than you ever could. And so you have enlightened me. This conversation says to me, you're not thinking big enough, Glo. So I don't know about y'all, but as I go into lunch, these are the things that I'm going to be thinking of, not just getting the names and numbers of the individuals that I want to have relationships with, but it is also about what do you really care about. So thank you, brothers. Thank you so, so very much for that. I really, really appreciate it. I do. And with that, I am going to now turn it over for lunch. I will tell you this. We want to make sure that you take pictures in front of the photo booth. We have a photo booth out there because we absolutely want to highlight this day and have it for future reference. And we also want to make sure that you go to the entrepreneur table because we have students here from the African Leadership Institute who are future entrepreneurs, and some of them are entrepreneurs right now. We want to make sure you visit them outside in the lobby. So without further ado, I will say lunch is served. Enjoy lunch. I believe we're back in here about 1:30, but please, please network, talk, build relationships, and we'll see you back here after lunch.